when the sale of adult diapers will surpass the sale of baby diapers in Canada, sometime just past 2040. I expect it will be a lot faster. In Japan, the sale of adult diapers passed the sale of children's diapers in 2011. Demographically, we're changing a lot, and that has implications for everything. And the reason we should start with demographic facts are because they're about us. We're really good at measuring them. And most importantly, the decisions are already made about most of these topics. We're just going to live through the consequences of them. And because they've already been made, they're projectable, they're facts. We can talk about the speed of some of these things, but the trends themselves are basically undeniable.
Please join me in welcoming current best-selling author of Breaking Point and CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, Darrell Bricker. Welcome, Darrell.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Teresa. Really appreciate it, and thanks everybody for giving me your time today. While it's a book about politics, I'm not going to talk about politics today. I'm actually going to talk about things that are probably a little closer to your heart, which is how it's going to affect businesses and other types of organizations around Canada. And it's really about, and I'm going to just pull up my slides here, about navigating the new breaking point. Let me make sure that I actually shared that. Share. Okay, there we go. So let me just get this started. So what I'd like to talk to you about is the new book that I just wrote with John Ibbotson, which is doing actually the best of any book I've ever launched. So I'm really happy about that. But I think it's really pertinent to a lot of other people than just people who are interested in politics. In fact, as I said before, I'm not really going to focus on that today. So where it starts from, the whole book, the premise of it is something from George Grant's Lament from a Nation, which is a book that's 60 years old today. But he said something that was really important, and that's to be Canadian is to be a unique species on the North American continent. Somebody posted something on Truth Social that said something different, which is actually there is no difference between Canada and the United States. The idea that really we are just part of the United States and we should just get over it and become the 51st state. And what I argue in the book is that Canada is actually not broken, but it's evolving, and it's certainly not ready to be one of the states of the United States. But the Canada that you grew up in, we're breaking from that past. We're breaking from the Canada that you see here on your screen on the left, which has Expo 67 in the background, and we're becoming something that looks more like the Canada that you see there on the right-hand side. Demographically, we're changing a lot, and that has implications for everything. And the reason we should start with demographic facts are because they're about us. We're really good at measuring them. And most importantly, the decisions are already made about most of these topics. We're just going to live through the consequences of them. And because they've already been made, they're projectable, they're facts. We can talk about the speed of some of these things, but the trends themselves are basically undeniable. And the three big ones are urbanization, fertility, and aging. And all three of them have an effect on every aspect of life in Canada. So the first thing, just looking at Canada in terms of its distribution of population, the red line saying the number of people in Canada who live in an urban environment, and the blue line saying the number of people who live in a rural environment, we're incredibly urban society. In fact, it's actually more suburban. The last decade in which we were half and half was basically the 1920s. So we talk about the Great White North, but hardly anybody actually lives in the most north part of the country. We all live within about 100 kilometers of the US border. And it's not just that we're becoming downtown creatures. In fact, we're not even becoming that. We're actually becoming suburban creatures, particularly suburban creatures who live in car commuting suburbs. And I'll show you the distribution of that in just a second. But metropolitan downtowns across the country are actually in decline. The suburbs are rising, and rural and small towns are coming down slightly, but not as fast as actually metropolitan downtowns over time. And so if you look at Canada today, most of us live in an auto commuting suburb. That is, over the last 20 years, over 80% of our population growth has been in just these types of communities. So if you're talking about who Canadian consumers are, who Canadian voters are, who people are that are growing in Canada, it's actually people living in the suburbs. In fact, when you take a look at the fastest growing communities in Canada, here's the top 10. And you can see Kelowna, BC, right at the very top. That's because a lot of people from retirement communities or retirement age are moving there, but also Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, still a commuting town or increasingly a commuting town from Toronto. And you can go through the list and you'll see most of them are west of the Ontario or west of the Quebec-Ontario border. There's a couple that do stand out, like Halifax and Moncton, but most of it is in Western Canada. And this is something that I cataloged in another book that I wrote with John Ibbotson called The Big Shift. And if you take a look at the share of our population by region, 1961 in the light blue strip, the dark blue strip, the percentage in 2024 around the time of our last, just after our last census. And you see what we're overall, what's happening in Canada is everything is moving to Ontario and to the west, declining Quebec and declining Atlantic Canada. So what's happening? The Canadian heartland is shifting. It's going from the east to the west, and we're seeing an expansion of our suburbs, stable downtowns, although declining over time. And all of this, I should point out, was happening before COVID. It's something that's been happening for the last 30 years. All of this has an effect on the single most important demographic factor in Canada, and that's fertility, the number of children that we have. The replacement rate of any country in terms of fertility, the number of children a woman has to have during her lifetime is 2.1. That's one to replace her partner, but also a little bit extra for those kids who don't grow it into adulthood and aren't able to have children. In Canada today, the fertility rate is 1.3. We're rapidly declining. This is the lowest rate that we've ever had in Canadian history. And it will continue to decline. I expect that we're going to announce another historic low this year. And it's happening in every single province in the country. Nunavut's the only one above replacement rate, but obviously it's a very small part of the overall population. And even in our biggest provinces, for example, like Ontario, the fertility rate is even below the national average. And what will this do to our population projections? Previously we were hearing people talking about Canada having 100 million population in the country. Even if we just have a fertility rate that's at 2.1, that red line, you'll see we're never going to get there. In fact, Canadian population is around 42 million. It's coming close to its peak level now. In fact, over the next couple of years, it's going to start to decline. But if our fertility rate remains very, very low, as we're seeing right now, we could, by the end of the century, be down to 20 million people, which is half of the population that we have today. And by the way, that's more likely than any of the other scenarios that are being predicted. And why is this happening? Urbanization, the empowerment of women, a focus on personal autonomy, which means I don't want to get married. I want to live alone. I want to have a longer life just by myself. We're delaying family formation. There's been a lot of government intervention in this space to reduce fertility, and it's had an effect. And every day, because our population ages, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, the structure of our population becomes older. And when the population becomes older, it's much harder to reproduce in the old-fashioned way. And as a result, what we're seeing is the expansion of one-person households in this country. What you're seeing in the top right-hand side of this chart, that picture of an older woman sitting beside herself is sitting by herself in her apartment or her home. That is the fastest growing part of the Canadian population, fastest growing households in Canada. So when you're thinking about your organization, what you're selling to Canadians, how you're communicating to Canadians, how you're dealing with Canadians, how much are we thinking about that group of the population? I expect for most organizations, it's not very much. We still seem to think in terms of nuclear families with, multiple numbers of children. That's just not the reality in Canada anymore. So economists refer to all of this as the baby bust economy because this is a global phenomena, and it's certainly the case in Canada. Youth is not going to drive our economic future. It's going to be the older population. They have the money, and they increasingly have the numbers. And that's why focusing on aging, the next obvious effect from urbanization fertility is that the population starts to age. And this is what's happened in Canada. So in the 1920s, you were considered old. If you were 57, that's how long most people lived. That was the average. Now it's 82. Statistics Canada tells us it's going to get up to 87 by the 2036. And today, Statistics Canada tells us, this was the 2016 census, that actually was the first time that we had more people 65 years of age or older than 15 years of age or younger. So you can see where all of this is going. And here's a really good representation of this. This is the percentage of the population that's 15 and under and 65 years of age or older, and what their likely distribution patterns are going to be going forward. And you see the big rise in the population. The structure of the population is actually the older part of the population rather than the younger part of the population. The implications of this for everybody who's involved in any aspect of dealing with Canadians is going to be enormous. And you're probably already seeing it in everything that you're doing. Normally, what we do is we talk about Canadian or any population in terms of a pyramid. And here's the Canadian population in 1961. This was the peak fertility rate for Canada, 3.91 in 1961. You can see it looks like a pyramid. That's why they call it a population pyramid. At the bottom, lots of kids being born. And as you move your way up the population and the ages of the population, people start to drop off because we all eventually drop off. So it looks like a pyramid. Lots of kids coming in, population's aging, but not extremely, but it looks like a pyramid. This is the Canadian population pyramid today, in which our fertility rate is 1.3. Pinching in at the bottom, where there's a lot fewer kids being born, and expanding at the top as more of our population growth is driven by people not dying as fast as they used to. So basically what's happening is we're flipping the population pyramid. Few kids, lots of people in the middle group there, but smaller group than the older group of people in the population. And when we talk about the sandwich generation, you can see exactly that's what's happening. So that group of people in the center who may be still raising children, but are increasingly focusing on taking care of their parents in their elderly age. This is just some fun facts that we can throw out. I have tons of these things. I just picked a couple of them to throw out today. When the sale of adult diapers will surpass the sale of baby diapers in Canada, sometime just past 2040, I expect it will be a lot faster. In Japan, the sale of adult diapers passed the sale of children's diapers in 2011. Their median age in Japan today is 48. In Canada, our median age is 42. And also comparing bicycles, when we can expect the number of bicycles to be surpassed by the number of adult mobility aids. Again, around 2040, I expect that it's going to happen a lot sooner. So, you're involved in urban planning, for example. It's great that we want to have bike lanes, but maybe you need to open them up for those mobility devices because there's going to be more of those than there are going to be people riding bicycles. And then in the not too distant future, I'm talking, 14 years from now. So the way that we can smooth this curve, this decline that we're going to experience in terms of our population, is through immigration. And in fact, what you can see in this chart, the bottom of the chart in gold is the population growth over time. So we've been, around 1% population growth in Canada since 2000. It's going to decline a little bit going forward because we're cutting back. Fertility continues to decline, and we're going to start cutting back on immigration, as the government has said. But where a lot of our population growth has been happening recently is from immigration. Almost all of it happens today as a result of immigration and people not dying as fast as they did previously. Almost none happens as a result of children being born into the population. There's not enough of them to replace the number of people who pass away every year. In fact, you can see that the Canadian population, the percentage of foreign-born people living in Canada, is now over a quarter, and it's gone up incredibly fast, particularly over the space of the last couple of years. That changes the composition of the population, the types of services that you have to offer to this group, or how you have to communicate to them every day in very meaningful ways. So where are they coming from? On the left, it was mostly from Western Europe and the United States. Today, it's mostly from Pacific countries, overwhelmingly India. So this is who your customers are going to be, particularly if you live in urban Canada and suburban Canada. Overwhelmingly, they live in Canada's major metropolitan areas. Almost none really go to rural areas. And almost overwhelmingly, they go to places like Ontario and British Columbia. Much less immigration in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. In fact, you can see the share of population versus the share of immigrants. You can see it's an Ontario and Western Canada thing, although we're seeing immigration pick up a bit in Atlantic Canada. And where are the cities that have the most immigration? Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal's up there, but if you take a look at this list, it's mostly places in Ontario and in Western Canada, particularly the major cities. So by 2036, 30% immigrants, 52% of immigrants and their born children, 30% are going to be speaking another mother tongue, 40% are going to be visible minorities, and 16% of us are going to be non-Christian religion. And Canadians are not happy with this. We used to have a very, I would say, strong view in Canada that immigration was a good thing for us. We're not thinking it's such a good thing anymore, which is one of the reasons we're seeing the government tack back on that. But all of these population issues are adding up into a real serious generational division in this country. We talk about horizontal divisions in this country in breaking point, which are the normal regional ones that we deal with, but there's also a big generational divide driven mostly by the fact that people do not think that they're going to be able to own homes going forward. So one of the reasons that was sort of addressed yesterday in the budget. In fact, we have most Canadians now thinking that, particularly younger people, that houses are only for the rich. In fact, we have a situation almost half of the population between under the age of 35 in Toronto, for example, still live at home with their parents. Similar numbers in Vancouver. On average in Canada, it's 35. Montreal, it's lower. So all of this is adding up into the need for a new playbook for Canada. And I'm just going to skip over a bunch of stuff because we're running out of time here. But as you can see, we can talk in a lot of detail, as much detail or at least less detail if you want it, on any of these topics. But it points out to really a new country that we're going to be dealing with in a new playbook. And I'm going to talk to you about how I talk to, say, for example, automotive people about this particular issue. So our population growth is slowing and aging, and it means the boomer sell-off is beginning. Immigration's keeping our numbers up in terms of population, but since they all go to urban areas, it's not going to increase the number of kilometers that we drive. Younger Canadians are knocked out of ownership of homes and cars. So how are we going to get them into the automobile market? Particularly since household formation is delayed and people are not having big families, and the need for two cars in particular is really declining. So the next decade is, how do you sell smarter to this market, and how do you match to the emerging markets, which are more suburban, as I said before, and more multicultural? It's all about the suburbs, the seniors, and the silver economy. The seniors now outnumber children, and they're going to dominate the market. And what they're looking for in cars is not horsepower. They're looking for comfort, reliability, and service. Focused on financing, warranties, and service plans for this particular group of the population. And by the way, this doesn't mean advertising for people driving, sports cars and doing adventure type traveling. It's people who are just looking for reliable transportation that's comfortable and affordable. Think mobility, not just metal. EV charging, adaptive technology, shared ownership models potentially. The silver economy is going to be the new customer base for people buying cars. Young people can't afford them. And for the Gen Z, yes, we have to find ways of getting them into the car market, but maybe it's through subscription models. Maybe it's through other types of low cost financing methodologies to get them in. And however you sell to them, one thing we know about the younger population, it's all about the digital experience. You need to win Gen Z now, or they're never going to come into your showroom. So also there's an opportunity for the automotive industry to move faster in some of this out of necessity because of what's happening to the potential decline in sales of automobiles that we're generally seeing in aging economies, where you've got to get ahead of governments. And if you're waiting for them to do it, you're probably going to be waiting till the opportunity goes away. So we need greater EV adoption. We need something done on infrastructure. Consumers are slow and they're reluctant to get involved in the EV market. We know they're interested, but the infrastructure thing really turns them off. So we need to find some way of getting them engaged. And what can automotive dealers do to provide them with those types of facilities, and do it in a really affordable way that really focuses more on what suburban Canadians want? And so finally, the last message when I talk to auto retailers about this is Canadian auto retailers aren't just selling vehicles, they're helping Canadians to keep moving through this breaking point, this break from the past, this emergence of a new Canada. So, taking into account all of these things, if you're somebody who's a fast mover, an early mover in this space, my expectation is that you're going to have an advantage in the marketplace. So, finally, just to end on a positive note, even though the book is called Breaking Point, Canada is not broken, but we are at a breaking point, particularly a breaking point from the past. A new Canada is emerging, and we faced up to these types of changes in the past, and we figured out a way to adapt and adopt these changes that are taking place. I'm quite optimistic about the ability of the country to do this. That's what the book talks about. But what it really begins with is starting to understand what this new emerging Canada is going to be as we break with our past. So anyway, that's the book. A very quick review of what I would talk about in a presentation. As I said, we can tailor it for anything that you want, but I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Darrell. I'm still soaking it all in, as I mentioned
Yeah,
off
it's
the
fast
top.
a lot. So,
But it is so fascinating, especially the fertility rate. I don't think people really think about it that way. And I love the examples that you gave where we used to be investing in diapers and now for kids, and now we're looking at it for adults. So yeah, so many different ways to think about your business. And we've got some questions coming in. So thank you for being available for a few questions. We've got one from Dr. Tsi who says, do we have data on interprovincial migration? And he gave the example of hearing that Alberta has a lower older population because many are moving out of province and younger workers are choosing to move to Alberta.
he just answered his own question.
Okay.
And also it's interesting. Even during the oil slump, the province of Alberta's immigration statistics showed inflow statistics showed that the province grew every month. And even when people started flowing back from the oil patch, leaving Fort McMurray because of the collapse in oil prices a few years ago, international immigration more than offset that. So Alberta is a place where a lot of international migrants are going, not just interprovincial migration. We're seeing more interprovincial migration in Atlantic Canada, for example, as people are considering retiring and going to a lower cost environment, maybe a slower pace of life. But the problem for Atlantic Canada, if that does happen, is it's a very expensive population to deal with. So they're going to have their own challenges that are related to that because it's one in which people are going to need higher healthcare services, higher community service needs. It's going to be a challenge. But yes, what you said about Alberta, you answered your own question.
Got it. And we have a question from Tuesday Johnson McDonald, who's asking about Indigenous connections. And I know you've got a whole chapter on First Nations first priority. So Indigenous connection and impact.
Yeah, we can't move forward if we can't deal with reconciliation, and you're seeing the effects of that right now. Whether it's the court decision in British Columbia on land ownership, through to even announcements today from the Indigenous community that they oppose some communities oppose the extension of a pipeline through British Columbia to Tidewater. I mean, all of these things are going to be on the table and considered at a fever pace because our normal economic relationship with the United States is disappearing very rapidly. If we recognize what the Canadian economy really is, it's one that's based on natural resources. We can call ourselves Silicon Valley North, and there's some things that we do here, but really, if all anybody has to do is sit down and take a look at the trade statistics for Canada on what we export, and it's basically natural resources, including our biggest export, oil and gas. So we're going to have to find a way for the Indigenous community and the broader Canadian community, all Canadians together, to find a way over these sorts of things. And we have some pretty strong recommendations about how that should be done and some great examples from various places that have been successful in the country, and we discuss them in the book.
Thank you. And Tuesday, you can get your book at any place that is a favorite of yours to buy books. So thank you for asking about that. And we'll go from also a question about Alberta specifically to Navina's question about, are there significant differences in Quebec versus the rest of Canada?
Yeah, Quebec is a low birth rate, just like the rest of the country. The single biggest difference is the lack of immigration. And where immigration goes to in Quebec, it's very clustered in Montreal. So Quebec has been slower than the rest of the country to evolve as a result, and from a multicultural perspective, to evolve its population relative to declining birth rates. So the substitution of immigration for declining birth rates hasn't gone as rapidly as it's gone in places like, for example, Ontario. But the big issue for me on Quebec is, what is Quebec identity these days? And we're going to see this played out in a very meaningful way next October when there's going to be another provincial election in Quebec. And right now, the polling basically shows that the Parti Québécois is leading by double digits. And the potential, well, in fact, the leader of the Parti Québécois says that he wants to have a referendum on Quebec sovereignty in the first term of a Parti Québécois government. So the potential that we could have something going on in Quebec at the same time, we could have something going on in Alberta and Saskatchewan on the national unity front, even if it doesn't amount to anything, is going to be a huge amount of distraction in Canada. It's going to dominate the conversation when we have all of these other issues to deal with. So again, something that we talk a lot about in Breaking Point and how to maybe reconcile some of these things. But yeah, it's just looming. You can just see it coming. So yes, there's a lot of population issues in Quebec, but this political issue is the one I think is going to dominate the conversation starting in January, February as we move through the spring.
Thank you for that. And I'm seeing a question from someone who's worked with you in past. And one of the things I love about you, Darrell, is there are a number of clients that bring you back year after year for updated insight. The next question is about Canada's brand, and it comes from Stephen, who says, "Thank you so much for another great book and presentation."
Thanks.
And yes, that you were instrumental in the CIRC polling about the attitudes of people to move to Canada. And the 2025 survey, Canada dropped from second place and is now tied with the UK and just 1 point above Spain. So the question is, do you think Canada has lost its brand in attracting the brightest and the best?
I think that there are elements of the Canadian economy, Canada, for certain people from certain countries that had certain expectations about moving to Canada and what would be delivered here that have been challenged by their own lived experience. And those things get back to the people who are thinking of coming to this place because the gateway communities in Canada these days are not the downtown Chinatowns or the little Indias or whatever. They're basically suburban areas like Scarborough in Toronto or Richmond in Vancouver or whatever. And these are people who are coming to Canada because they're looking for economic opportunities in many instances. I'm leaving aside asylum seekers, but people are looking for economic opportunities, and it's been a fairly chaotic situation when it comes to immigration. I mean, we've seen the government now claw back on everything related to temporary foreign workers and everything related to visas for foreign students. So I think that that's going to have an effect on the image of Canada as a place to come to. Because there's a degree of uncertainty about what's going on. I still think for people who have skills, who have resources, who are interested in moving to Canada, the ability to achieve a middle class lifestyle and the type of prosperity that they're looking for, they still see this as a good place to come. But it's the other groups that are a bit more marginal, I think, in their thinking that might have some more problems. The other thing that to roll in beside that is what people are thinking of the United States right now, which used to be the most aspirational place for people to go. So the question is, how are we comparing that to the United States? Well, Donald Trump's only been in power since January. I guess we have to do another survey to find that out. But I have done research that we're going to be releasing in the next couple of weeks on the Halifax International Security Forum in mid-November, and I can tell you the American reputation has just cratered on a global basis. Canada, by the way, scores at the top in terms of its international reputation as a place that will likely do good over the space of the next decade in the world. So I think that still works for us. But that lived experience of people coming to this country and things not working out the way that they wanted it to because of the chaos around our immigration policy, that's hurting us.
Hmm, let's Thank you for that. We've got a bunch more questions, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to try to do two more. If you've got time for two more, and I'll roll a few of
Sure.
them together. Okay. One jumps off of immigration and infrastructure, and one question about in relation to automotive, why are people still buying a failing mode of transportation, i.e. cars, instead of using buses, streetcars, etc.? And one concern about the challenge with infrastructure overall.
Okay, so let's deal with infrastructure and transportation first. The reason they're buying cars is because we don't have transit. Simple. Basically, the cities were built to accommodate cars. They weren't, the idea of suburban transportation. It was assumed that the highways would be enough, and we wouldn't need things like trains. We need to seriously be looking at other alternatives. I mean, we've got the Premier of Ontario talking about digging a tunnel under the 401. I don't think anybody anticipated that the population would grow to the level that it has, and the infrastructure is falling apart as a result of it. On infrastructure, yes, it's about how you accommodate the suburbs. Full stop. On the issue of immigration, what was it again, Teresa?
It was about will our infrastructure be able to handle immigration?
Well, we're cutting back on immigration, so hopefully it'll slow down the effect to a certain extent, although that's got other challenges it's going to present. But no, we're seeing that it isn't. I mean, so one of the things that we know based on our survey research, and I very quickly, sorry about that, showed you the chart and the huge jump in people's opposition to immigration and feeling that there's too many immigrants in Canada. And the truth is, there are too many. There are too many. I mean, there's 3 million immigrants in Canada that the government never planned for and don't even really know what they're doing or can't even, process. So they're not right to, they're not incorrect to say that there's challenges in the job market, there's challenge in the housing market, there's effects on the healthcare system, and it's because people are actually seeing all of this happening. So yeah, immigration is something that's going to have to smooth out over a period of time, and we have to get back to rebuilding the confidence that Canadians had in the system, which, by the way, was an unbelievable advantage for Canada's prosperity when we did manage it well. The last 10 years, we've just gone in the wrong direction on this, and it's really hurt us as a country.
Thank you. Okay, one last question relating to AI, aging population, and improving productivity. Do you think we can improve productivity enough to overcome the very real challenges we will face in supporting more non-workers with fewer current workers?
100%. And it's not the problem to solve. It's the low hanging fruit. The problem to solve is robots don't go for lunch. And what do I mean by that? A problem is not going to be a production problem. It's going to be a consumption problem. Old people don't buy stuff. We're going to have a lot of them. We're going to have to figure out how to bring them back into the economy and producing consumption in the economy. Because if all we've got is a whole group of old people that are not interested in buying whatever it is that we have out there based on price, because they probably already have it. I mean, the people who drive consumption in an economy are young people. So whenever I hear about AI and improving production and all the rest of it, yes, it's all going to happen. But the problem is that you can produce it for the price of zero, and who's going to consume it? And that's the problem that we're going to be dealing with in terms of economic growth going forward. We need consumption in order to keep the economy growing. And if we don't have it, and we basically have people who are only consuming things like medical services and pensions, that's going to be a problem for us. So how do we rekindle the consumer market? We have to start making things for older people, things that they would be interested in buying. And this was the message I was delivering to our friends in the automotive retail space. I mean, they can produce a car for half the price, but if there's nobody who's interested in buying it, it doesn't matter. I've already got my car. I'm going to own it for 25 years. I'm 75. What do I need another car for? So, I mean, that's the problem we're going to be running into.
Thank you so much for all this, Darrell. And again, always fascinated how you have so much on the top of your head, and I can see from the chat and all the questions you sensed. This is what happens when you speak. It just generates so many ideas, so much conversation, which is really valuable for going forward for organizations. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to do the book draw now. So give me a minute here to share my screen. We have entered everyone's name who has RSVP'd, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of the book. I think the screen is showing now. Here we go. ensure that we get your full contact info and send you a copy this week. Thanks everyone for participating and joining today. I'm seeing the comments here about how valuable it was. Such great insights. People have the book on their Christmas list or going out to buy it right away. Very
Thank
interesting
you.
and insightful presentation. Thanks again, Darrell, and thanks everyone for joining. And we look forward to helping you with your speaker programming going forward. And hopefully Darrell Bricker is high on your list. Thanks everyone. Take care.